Welcome to the exhibition at the Zuccaire Gallery, Printing Solidarity, Tricontinental Graphics from Cuba. I'm Daniel Menzo, I'm a PhD candidate in the Art History and Criticism program.
And I'm Amy Kahng. I'm also a PhD student in the Art History and Criticism program here at Stony Brook University.
And we're really thrilled to bring you on this short and deep dive tour and welcome you to come check out the exhibition, which is on view now in the Zuccaire Gallery at the Stoller Center until the end of February 2022. So we're gonna start at the entrance wall and then walk through a few of the thematic groupings of these posters.
And I just want to note that we are two of the curators, two of four curators. The other curators, Sarah Myers and Elise Armani, and we also worked with the guidance of Professor Sohl Lee. And just for a little background on how this exhibition came about, we kind of first started thinking about it, conceptualizing this exhibition, coming out of a grad seminar taught by Professor Sohl Lee in spring 2020 in a global post-war course. We were reading the book by Anne Garland Mahler about tricontinentalism, and we were looking at these kinds of some of these poster images, and then Professor Lee suggested and knew that Interference Archive, our collaborator on this exhibition, had this fantastic collection of these posters, and suggested potentially working on a kind of exhibition of these posters. And then that following summer and fall, we kept kind of talking about this, and then this past year we worked on conceptualizing the groupings. We went to the archive and we selected works and we wrote these texts together, and that's kind of how this exhibition came about. I don't know, Daniel, if you want to add anything to that.
Just that once we start walking through the exhibition and you'll see the different thematic groupings. It was during our visit at the Interference Archive, which is in downtown Brooklyn, where we started seeing these sort of relationships between the posters and the themes that they're displaying kind of organizing themselves in a way. We started seeing relationships and sort of visualize the exhibition in real time, working with the material. And so it's really exciting to show it on the wall after seeing it in person too.
Yeah, so we're excited to get to share this with you.
So the exhibition, Printing Solidarity, Tricontinental Graphics from Cuba, looks at printed material, these posters that were produced from the Organization of Solidarity with the peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. This was an organization that was formed in 1966 in Cuba, off the heels of the Tricontinental Conference in Havana. And these posters, in very visually striking ways, tries to communicate these ideas of solidarity and anti-imperial tactics that were at the forefront during this time and sort of centered at the conference and throughout the OSPAL's organization. So while these posters and these images are historically specific, they also sort of resonate throughout the time since, and there have been a lot of recent graphic designers who have found inspiration in the sort of graphics and subject matter that are brought up in these posters as well. And it's fascinating how these posters, as you'll see, while maybe not considered typically like art objects, they're widely circulated and cheap materials that sort of kind of oscillate between what can be visually striking material, aesthetically, but also working for sort of a communicative purpose. They're communicating ideas, they're working in democratic ways. And so we're gonna start walking through some of the themes now.
Yeah, and so I'm just gonna add to that as we kind of start turning around. OSPAL is the acronym for the Organization of Solidarity with the Peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, just in case that was unclear. And The artists who are designing these posters are all Cuban artists for the most part. There's one American artist, but they're all working in Cuba, but these posters are featuring different events or different anti-imperial kinds of solidarities across the globe, across these kind of the third world countries, those the countries who are kind of aligning together, not wanting to associate or align with the United States or with the Soviet Union during this Cold War period. And so I'm going to take us through, would you like to do this? The first section. So we came up with 5 different thematic categories, as Daniel mentioned. In the archive, we saw the ways that certain posters and certain kind of visual themes were reoccurring. And so the first theme we came up with is around the cult of personality. So the way that these OSPAL artists feature individual figures, political revolutionary figures, politicians, sometimes martyrs, and the way that they use a kind of like wit and humor often. So sometimes they're romanticizing the figure, like you can see here with Sandino, but oftentimes they're really kind of a lot more playful with these figures. So I'm going to just show you here. We have this Nixon image, and so we have Nixon here, kind of turned into a vampire. You can see the way that it unfolds in the video here. So Nixon turns into a vampire. And then also here on this wall, we can see the way that like Che Guevara is kind of made into this rainbow psychedelic rock star, rather than just a kind of maybe more romanticized figure of the revolutionary leader that is more commonly seen in these kinds of revolutionary images. So looking again at this Nixon image, these posters were actually most commonly folded up and inserted into the Tricontinental magazine journal. And so they'd be folded and inserted. So you can see here the way that the Nixon poster would be included in this kind of publication. Do you want to add to that anything, Daniel?
We will show further into the exhibition a grouping of these bulletins. But for the most part, these were spread and distributed throughout the world. And because the posters were so striking, so just visually striking, often people would sort of subscribe and receive these bulletins just for the fact of, tearing out the poster and sort of using it as an aesthetic display as well. But these bulletins also have rich scholarship and information and articles on the ideas behind OSPAL and the idea of tricontinentalism. So it's this match between the sort of really striking visuals, but also the deep content as well.
Yeah, I'll also mention that. So we mentioned that this OSPAL was founded in 1966 and was most active in the 60s and 70s, but only recently closed in 2019. So kind of a long history of this organization. And now coming back to this wall, can you take it away?
So, sure. So another of the themes that was coming up throughout engaging with the posters and is really impossible to ignore is the strong presence of symbols and images of weaponry and warfare. So whether this happens in sort of abstract ways, like this poster where a figure is sort of embedded into, the barrel of a gun, or in more sort of visual, foregrounded ways where we see weapons and arms in very sort of central context. The whole idea sort of supports the context of OSPAL and the anti-imperial efforts, and so we are very cognizant of showing these posters today and the sort of tensions and discomfort that might bring up. Clearly, images of gun and warfare in today's context speaks to a different sensibility and a different viewer than it would have during the 60s and 70s. And so we welcome that kind of critical conversation that students and professors can have around how the same image could evolve and sort of speak to different contexts and conversations around what was perhaps originally the kernel behind these posters and how they might take on different meanings today. And so we put this in conversation with the other thematic groupings, but really, as you can see with how the posters are all displayed, it's a very fluid and sort of overlapping context of themes. And so even though there's like a theme here of warfare and weaponry, there's really a whole lot of it spread out throughout the walls.
So our third thematic grouping is titled Pre-Colonial Iconography. And so in this thematic grouping, we kind of highlight the way that OSPAL and these OSPAL artists often use these kind of visual icons that were like immediately identifiable or immediately kind of brought to mind to the viewer a certain geographical location. So for example, we have this kind of essentialized idea of Africa as featured with these carved wooden figurines, or the idea of kind of like Latin America as featured through these like ancient warriors. And so we can see kind of the way that you know, OSPAL, these OSPAL artists are trying to create an immediately recognizable kind of icon of these locations, but also the way that they're kind of essentializing these other continents and these other places. But we also can see the way that these sort of like pre-colonial icons are being juxtaposed with modern iconography. So in the background of these images, you can see guns, this figurine also holding a gun. And I guess we can speak a little bit to process too, and the way that a lot of these visual icons and kind of like these visual patterns were reproduced and reused by OSPAL artists, but also taken up by other artists of different movements constantly. So there's a lot of this idea of reproduction and kind of appropriation of these kind of visual iconographies. So in the background here, we see these kind of this gun pattern, which is also used in the background here. So both of these posters, using the same kind of pattern background.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll also just mention that this poster here, if you come close, you can see that this is actually an original screen print. So you can see the way that the ink kind of has pooled and the layers of ink here. So this potentially being like an original by the artist, which then would get reproduced into those posters that were then folded up and inserted into the Tricontinental bulletins and then mailed, internationally. I also want to point out, we didn't mention this yet, but each of these posters, the text is translated into 4 different languages for the most part. So we have it in English, in Spanish, in French, and then in Arabic. So kind of an attempt at sort of language accessibility.
So another of the thematic groupings in the exhibition is centered around women and children. The imagery of women and children plays a very sort of specific and also abstract role in the context of what OSPAL is trying to communicate with regard to tricontinentalism and also anti-imperialism. And it's striking how an organization that had well over 50 artists, only 8 of them were women. And so it's something to keep in mind that while looking at these posters that foreground the role of women and children in very strong ways, it's hard to sort of overlook the perhaps more hyper-masculinized imagery throughout more of the other posters. So they sort of stand in for a duality of, on the one hand, like what's at stake in this fight of anti-imperialism, of sort of the protection of the vulnerable, in this sort of way, the vulnerability, let's say, of women and children. And at the same time, on the other hand, playing into the idea of the sort of revolutionary family that is only possible through reproduction. And so these images and these symbols of women and children sort of play this abstract and slippery role in very sort of like particular moments. And so what I was sort of hinting to earlier was this poster by the artist Daisy Garcia Lopez, the poster Day of Solidarity with the Afro-American People from August 18th, 1968. It's striking how even in a very small poster like this, we still see imagery of weapons and warfare mixed in with the sort of the silhouette of a woman and this crouching figure with a child on her back as well. And so it's sort of a collapse of various themes that come up throughout the exhibition. And so it's a really striking poster. We actually, maybe I'll point this out at this time, we have a exhibition booklet that also goes with the exhibition, and some students from Professor Lee's undergraduate course wrote detailed wall labels for a selection of the posters. And so we welcome visitors and students and faculty alike to engage with the booklet as well, as it sort of expands on the exhibition itself. And then the sort of concluding thematic grouping, although it's certainly in conversation with the rest of the posters, looks at the idea of typography and design. And as you've seen already, all of the posters are very vibrant. Most of them are very vibrant and colorful. There are some that are, let's say, intentionally more muted. But for the most part, these aesthetics are sort of coming out of a history of Cuban artistry and design that was in the historical moment, coming out of sort of the cinematic posters as well. And so the archivist and historian Lincoln Cushing has discussed how the aesthetics of this particular organization has influence from perhaps several years of engagement with more popular posters of films and just, let's say overall popular culture that needed to grab a viewer's attention. And so this is a very deliberate way of trying to communicate a very complex idea, but to do so in a very sort of catching and at the same time minimal perhaps way of only speaking through color and line and graphic to try and communicate very abstract and complicated ideas, I think is very powerful and strong. So for example, this poster of the Day of Solidarity with the people of Guatemala, we have a figure in a three-quarters profile gazing in a direction that might be referenced with like gazing into the future. And then we also have this very forceful star sort of shooting up in a way that communicates progress and futurity. And the overall rendering in a very like vibrant, colorful way would immediately speak to a viewer of trying to rally hope and courage in a way also.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the works in this vitrine here. We also borrowed the actual Tricontinental bulletins from Interference Archive. So you can see here the striking imagery on the covers of the of the booklets. And some of these images also, or these designs also showed up as kind of posters that would have been folded and inserted in. And here you can also see the interior of the Tricontinental bulletin. It's not very visible in this example, but within these bulletins there's also little designs, kind of revolutionary designs, little like kind of almost clip art, very simplified designs that would have been copied and taken up by other revolutionary movements. Anything else to add?
Maybe just, we showed the Nixon folder, or folded up example, and as you'll see in some of these examples, the posters, you can see the fold marks. So these are objects that have a history on their own as well. So you can see the way they've been used while on display as well. So a lot of them have the fold marks. So thank you for coming along with us on this gallery tour of Printing Solidarity. We look forward to maybe meeting you in person. We are more than happy to actually give an in-person tour as well. And just as a plug for the spring semester, we will be launching a series of programming in relation to the exhibition that we're very excited about, and we will share with the campus more widely very soon.
Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you all get a chance to see the show.
Bye.